I'm Michael Daniel. I'm the president and CEO of the Cyber Threat Alliance, and I'm here with Kristin Judge, the president and CEO of the Cybercrime Support Network. Thanks for joining me, Kristin.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the impact of cybercrime on the digital ecosystem. And while it's often the nation-state attacks and the spectacular 0 days and other things that grab all of the headlines, the mundane reality for most people and organizations is that cybercrime is actually a lot bigger problem for them in cyberspace than dealing with a nation-state. And so over the course of the month of November, CTA is going to be engaged in a number of different efforts to highlight the issues associated with cybercrime and what we can do about them. Kristin has been very instrumental in that area and has worked very hard at building up the Cybercrime Support Network, which is a key partner of the Cyber Threat Alliance. So we're very happy to be working with you and talking with you about this issue today. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Cybercrime Support Network and why you got it started?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, we talk about a lot that there's so many nonprofits doing the same thing. I didn't want to go into education and awareness. I wouldn't have started an extra organization unless I knew there was something key that we were focusing on that no one else was. So the Cybercrime Support Network is there to serve individuals and small businesses after they've been impacted by a cybercrime. Obviously, when people come to us, they're also going to learn how to prevent from being re-victimized. But we really needed someone to speak up for the victims and tell people what to do, where to go after something's happened. So that's the niche that we're filling.
Oh, that's great. So what would you say some of the biggest myths that you run across when you deal with people? When you talk about cybercrime, what are some of the most common myths?
Yeah. We found it was really interesting that many people didn't even understand they were a victim of cybercrime. So we did some proof of concept in 6 states with funding from the Department of Justice, Office of Victims of Crime. And we used 211, which is an existing system, for people to call if they had been a victim of cybercrime. And what we found out is people were calling 211 because they couldn't pay their rent or they needed mental health counseling. And then the 211 call specialist would notice, oh, why can't you pay your rent? And it's because they had been a victim of a cybercrime, but they didn't even really know that. So we realized we have to go back and even explain to people, what is cybercrime and have you been impacted by it? And so some of the issues we also are concerned about is people blame themselves. So, the biggest myth of cybercrime, I think, is, oh, it's your fault because you were too dumb and you clicked on it. Or, you should have known better than to send money to that person. Well, we have to make sure that we're not doing victim blaming because we need people to come out and talk about their stories so that they can influence other people, because we need to have the victims tell their story so other people can learn from it. As if it's just you and I, we don't really get the message across as well as someone who's actually been through it.
Yeah, no, that's right. I also think it's also the case that, con men and swindlers have been around for, centuries, millennia, right? And it wouldn't be a line of work for people if it didn't have a return, right? If it wasn't successful. And so at least some of the time. And so I think that you're right that sort of people blaming themselves is not the right way to go. Many of these organizations are incredibly sophisticated. And they know how to tailor messages to play on people's fears and how to shape, response and, trigger people to actually respond. And so I don't, I've spent a long time in this field, and every once in a while I have that going to click on that link. Wait, no, I really shouldn't do that.
Right,
it's
right.
very easy to do. So
it is. And that's where, 10 years ago, the bad guys had to create all these algorithms to break into our systems. And then someone had the great idea, oh, I just need to convince someone to click on something. I don't have to come up with all this code. I just have to pretend to be dating about 100 people. If 3 or 4 of them give me $100,000, I've made enough money, right? And
Right.
it's funny you talk about, the profitability. And I was thinking about a month ago, and it just really hit me. Obviously, it's so obvious, but cybercrime's not going to go away until people stop making a profit. We have to make it not profitable. And so that, I think, is going to be our biggest challenge. And so we've got to look at it from that point of view. So criminals are doing this because they're making a lot of money. Okay, how do we stop them from making a lot of money? Instead of how do we stop someone from clicking on something, maybe we look at it just from a different lens, and really focus on how do we make sure it's not profitable. I know that's something that your work at CTA is really helping to move forward, that idea.
Yeah, that's actually been one of my big areas of focus, or ways of thinking about cybersecurity for a long time, is that we have to go after the business model for the adversaries and really start to think about it as, how do you undercut their business model? How do you make it much less productive, much less worthwhile? That also can apply to nation states, although their business calculus is different. But definitely for the cyber criminals who are in it for the money, going after their business model is certainly the right way to go. Based on what you see, at CSN, what would you say for, if you're talking to the average small business owner or even a medium-sized, company, what would you say the biggest cybercrime threats are right now that you're seeing?
It has to be ransomware. There's so many people talking about that, and I'm hearing so many terrible stories. The ransomware is something which is also tied to just a phishing email for the most part. But the ransomware is becoming so lucrative and so widespread. I think that's really on top of mind for any size business right now. But certainly that medium-sized enterprise that may not have a CISO or someone on staff that really does security full-time, or more than one person that does security full-time.
Right.
I've talked to companies that have 100 employees and don't have a CISO. And I think to myself, that's just a ripe target. So
yeah, and certainly that certainly comports with what we see from CTA as well. Just the degree of ransomware and the sort of the prevalence of it, all up and down the all up and down the food chain, right? From individuals still, but also now much more going after those sort of organizations that they think might have some money, but probably don't, have the security staff to, deal with a problem. So, and
K-12 schools. I'm sure you've been thinking about K-12 schools for as long as I have, because I know who the IT staff are there, and they are not security people. They're someone's mom who also had a computer degree, and then when the kids went to school, she became the IT person.
Yeah.
We've got a huge vulnerability in our schools that keeps me up at night a bit.
Yeah, and I think our healthcare sector too is really, under fire, and I think that's going to continue to be a big problem. So I think you were talking earlier about being a resource for people that have been victims of cybercrime. So if someone thinks that they've been the victim of cybercrime, what should they do? What do you tell people?
So it depends, which is the easy answer. So
that's
if
an annoying cyber answer, right?
Yeah, right. It depends. There's 700 different things you should do depending on what happened. That's part of the problem. So in the U.S., you know all too well that if someone is in danger, they should call 911, obviously, because some cyber threats do pose a physical or life-threatening danger to someone. So obviously we want them to call 911 if they're in danger. But I talked to some 911 dispatch centers who can get up to 100 calls a day from people who are victims of a tax scam or a romance scam. And so people are calling 911. So we don't want people calling 911 unless they're in danger. Then we do want them calling their local Secret Service office or FBI office if they've been had a high dollar loss or had a business email compromise. But it's not really the first reaction the typical American has is, oh, I'm going to call up the FBI and they're going to care what happened to me. So I always like to, when I used to do speaking in person or even virtually, bring on FBI cyber agents and say, look, yes, this is Tom. He really does want you to call him. So there is a lot that the FBI and Secret Service can do. But for the general public, the 700,000 people that we've served in the past 2 years, we created fraudsupport.org as a place for people to go and figure out, okay, am I really a victim of this? And then what are my first steps I should take? Then how do I report, recover, and then reinforce my security? So when we worked with 911 dispatch centers, I asked them, what do you need most when it comes to cybercrime? And they said, number one, training. And number two, can you just build a website so we can send people there instead of hanging up on them and know that at least they're going to get some help? So fraud support really is just the first start of giving the American public a place to go and be able to triage themselves. But hopefully, when we've talked about this many times, we hope there's going to be a national center one day where people in the US can go call one phone number nationwide, like they do in Israel and Australia and New Zealand and Singapore. We're a little bit behind here in the US, but I think because of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission recommendations, some of the stuff going through in the NDAA, we might be moving closer to having a national center.
And I should add, for the acronym challenged, the NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act, the one piece of legislation that actually does typically move in a given year. Even in the current gridlocked Congress, the Defense Authorization Act tends to move. So, I think that that's really important to, and this is one of the aspects of cybercrime that I find so interesting from from a policy standpoint, right, is that for the first time we've actually separated crime from location, meaning that, in the past you had to be, somebody had to be wherever the crime was occurring. Now, maybe the crime boss was somewhere else and his flunkies or minions were doing it, right? But there still had to be a person there actually committing the crime. And that meant that crime was intensely local in many ways, right? And now that's not really the case anymore. You can be half a planet away and still commit these crimes. And so I think that has been a big change that our law enforcement agencies are still dealing with, and trying to figure out how do you. And it's one of the reasons why we have such problems. Like if somebody's car gets broken into, or I had something stolen from my property here where I live, there's no question about who I call and what I do, right? Now, I still don't necessarily expect, the police to investigate, somebody rifling through my car, but I still know, I can file a police report, and if something was taken, I can use that to call the insurance, right? And we just don't have a lot of those mechanisms built up yet for cybercrime.
We don't, and you're absolutely right. It's no one's fault. It's just the nature of the crime. And a lot of the work that we've been doing, we're finding out it's not even a Part 1 crime. We have different laws in every state. What prosecutor is going to pick it up? They don't know if it's where the victim is or where the criminal is. Who's on first is really the problem here. And, a lot of the international stuff that you and I are doing together, it's an issue worldwide. There's really no jurisdictional direction, especially in the US, saying who owns cyber. The Third Way, their cybercrime to catch a hacker, they have such great research. They've looked and created this wheel that I like to present about, and it shows who in the federal government has law enforcement responsibilities in cybercrime. And I think there's 7 or 8 agencies. I mean, obviously you know this better than I do, but who's taking the lead? Someone's got to lead. And that's why I feel like if we have a national cyber center that is the first place where someone goes, they take the lead on then where that call goes. And we've talked to the program in Australia and Israel. They're ready to show us how they do it, the back end. And we fortunately have been given 2 cooperative agreements from CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS, who's been so fantastic at protecting our elections with the election infrastructure ISAC. But they've given us a cooperative agreement to write up a feasibility study and to test out what it would be like if we had one national place for people to go and then report and then share that threat information. So we hope to really get to a point where we can supplement CTA's threat information and really show you what's happening with those consumers and small businesses, which I don't think we have a really good vision on yet.
Yeah, I don't think we do either. And that would be very exciting if we could get to that point where we could start to get that kind of viewpoint. Now, of course, as you mentioned at the top, Kristin, one of the biggest issues here, right, is to also then help people avoid being re-victimized, right? And so certainly I talk a lot about this, about the way to think about cybersecurity and how to address it. I know that I certainly find kind of two mindsets that I often run across. One of which is it's too hard. I don't understand what those cyber geeks are talking about, those nerds, and it's just too hard. And then the other one is like, well, everybody gets hacked, so what's the point of it? And so I often have to sort of first confront it sounds strange, but it's almost, I have to confront those fatalistic mindsets first before we can even talk about the actual techniques you might use. So I don't know if you encounter that same sort of.
I do, and this is really a big issue for me. And no, I sit with friends. So I have friends in high political offices who run multi-trillion-dollar companies, and I have friends who have said to me, "Hey, can you sit down with me and help me put two-factor on my emails? What should I be doing with my social media?" And I know people that run amazing organizations, but they still are intimidated by adding two-factor authentication to their email account. They want me to sit down with them. This is the issue we have. So number one, I want to start requiring two-factor authentication. I'm a little tired of hearing companies say, well, customers don't want the friction of two-factor. I say customers don't want the friction of being a victim. So,
right.
Remember when the banks didn't have two-factor and then they all started adding it and everyone was afraid to be the first one because everyone was going to leave that bank and say, oh, it's too hard to get into my banking account because I have to add a 6-digit code. Well, no one left their bank, and now people just expect to have that there. They don't know what it's called for the most part, most people, but they're glad it's there because they feel more secure. When can we get the social media and the email companies to make two-factor opt out instead of opt in? That's where I think we're missing out. And until we do that, I'm not feeling very confident that we can stop that first victimization. I feel good about stopping the re-victimization because when people call 211 in our pilot states, we've done research and 91% of them say, I don't think I'm going to be a victim again. Number one, because I know where to call and get help. Number two, I learned something from the person I talked to, and I know I'm going to be able to handle this now because I've sat through it and I understand it better. So I think we can stop re-victimization, which can cut down cybercrime by 90% probably. People are repeat victims.
Yeah.
But until we get the companies to build security in by default, I don't think we're going to stop those first-time hacks.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting what you talked about, too, in terms of the opt-out versus opt-in. And, that's another example of, that's not a cybersecurity issue. Right. That's not a technological cybersecurity issue. That is human psychology. We've learned that from, retirement systems. Right. I was always fascinated about this, that like if you look at companies that set up their retirement system where employees are automatically enrolled unless they opt out versus companies that you have to actually enroll. The difference in the take rate is ridiculous. It's like, it's like 95% of people in the first category and 50% in the second. And it's all just because, in the first category, you're automatically enrolled. And I think we have to get to much more of that sort of opt-out mentality for cybersecurity, where it's just built into the environment. And if you want to opt out of it, in many cases, we'll let you. And, but most people aren't going to do that.
No, because they're not even going to know it's an option because they don't even know about how to opt in. But I think people are looking for companies to keep them safer. And I think back to the Nest issue a year ago when that young girl, 8 years old, had a guy, through the Nest camera talking to her. Within about a week, Nest made two-factor authentication required. to open it up and to start Nest that has a camera in your child's bedroom, you have to have two-factor authentication on it. I don't think there's going to be a parent who uses that camera who's going to say, oh, this is too much friction. So yeah. I don't know what we have to do, but I want to do some research. So if anybody wants to partner with us to do research, I want to do research to prove to the companies that the public is going to say, I don't mind the friction of 2FA or multi-factor because it's so simple now, even compared to 5 years ago. I mean, it's really somewhat seamless. There's not a lot of friction, but they don't want the friction of being a victim. It takes a long time to recover a hacked account, and people don't want to have to do that. They want the companies, I think, and that's anecdotal until I do the research, but I would love to partner with somebody to do that research because we've got to push these companies. And I think it can't come from their own internal product, specialists. It's got to come from the outside, a trusted third party to say to them, look, here's the research. People are okay with you adding more security in. The banks did it, and no one stopped banking.
Yeah. And I think that, this, we talk about this in the Internet of Things area because the margins are so small for a lot of these devices and things. And it, I think looking at the policy solutions for how to make that a market differentiator, and even just, looking at even if you want to, right now, there's even a lack of information in the marketplace, right? If you wanted to say, I want a webcam that is more secure, if you try to go out and figure out which one is more secure, it's really hard to do. And so I think we also have to work on enabling, and again, you mentioned the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. This is certainly one of their recommendations as well, is to improve the amount of information that consumers have, right? So that they can make those decisions, so that they can actually start saying, actually, if I'm going to buy a camera or a Nest or one of these things, I'm actually going to buy the one that's a little more secure. And then you actually start putting some market pressure on the companies.
And I think people will opt for that, don't you? I hear from people, they want to be more secure, but we're never going to teach all of the people that need to be more secure how to do it. It is painstakingly long and arduous to sit with some of my friends and add two-factor authentication to their accounts. They've got 700 passwords. They don't know where they are, and their social media is wide open. They don't know where to go. It is difficult. We're not going to get the general public to add the security that they need to decrease cybercrime. We're just not. So we have to start thinking a different way. Yeah.
And I think that's actually one of the things I talk a lot about when I talk with, company leaders and other things, is to change that mindset that, cybersecurity, in my view, is not a problem that you can solve. It is a risk that you have to manage. So, I often will ask, company leaders, it's like, well, do you solve your legal problem? No, you have legal risk that you manage, right? You have brand issues that you manage. You don't solve that. You manage that over the long term, right? And the same thing is true with cybersecurity. And I think this gets back at what we were talking about that mindset issue of people. There are things that people can do to materially lower their risk of being a victim of cybercrime. And we've talked about one of them, the multi-factor authentication. I think another one is using a password manager. It's a very simple thing for most people to, it's painful to make that transition to using a password manager in many ways, but once you get using it, it's actually more convenient.
Way more convenient.
And B, you can use way more complex passwords than you would otherwise, and you can have a different one for all of your different services and things, which really reduces your risk. And then if you put some controls on your social media, for most individuals and small businesses, you've just whacked a huge chunk of your risk profile way down if you just did those three things.
Huge, yeah. But what we need to do, though, is have someone sit down with them to do it. We can't just give a video. We can't just have a checklist. What I'm finding is some of the most intelligent people I know are not going to sit down and do it themselves unless someone's there to help them. So we want to create a community program that helps pair up people with those who can do this easily and understand it, with those who need that someone to sit down with them, especially our seniors. So, I went ahead and did the credit freeze with my in-laws and my parents and my kids, and took the time to make sure everybody had their password manager, added their two-factor authentication. It took some time, but they were never going to do it without me. But you're right, we can change people's security posture by probably 85% if they just do a few things. Now, if the companies come in and start doing those few things for people, I know I get some backlash sometimes. Well, the bad guys are just going to figure out how to, step over two-factor. I know they will, but at the minimum, though, if we know that 99.9% of breaches on Microsoft Cloud can be stopped by two-factor authentication, according to one of their articles, then goodness gracious, why in the world is that not included? Right. But we need to talk to the consumers. The consumers need to speak up. And that's why I think we just really need to do a good research study, talk to people around the country, all different ages. Would you like to be able to use this like you do on your bank, which is called two-factor, or would you rather not and have the opportunity for the hacks of your bank account?
Yeah.
Or your email.
I think that's right. And I think I also challenge that sort of mentality that, yes, the more sophisticated adversaries will figure out ways to still work around, things like two-factor. But I also submit that, some of our problem right now is that the tools and other things that are available even for your run-of-the-mill hackers are just, the environment is too easy for them. And if we actually make it harder, it eventually will not be worth the effort, right? And this, will we drive the really sophisticated all cyber criminal organizations out of business? Of course not. No. But we can certainly cut down on the volume of cybercrime across the ecosystem and, begin to drive that level of impact on our economy and on individuals, frankly, public health and safety, back down. And so I think that's why the work that you're doing, Kristin, and others to really focus on that segment of the market, the individuals and the small businesses is so important because it makes up such a big chunk of the digital ecosystem. And I really think that is an area that we're going to have to put more emphasis on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we need information sharing organizations like CTA. When people ask me about CTA, I got my start at the MS-ISAC, so the National Council of ISACs. I've been to some of those meetings. I appreciate so much the FS-ISAC, the retail. They all do great work, but I call yours sort of the godfather of the ISACs because you're getting the information firsthand before it has to be filtered through a certain vertical in the business area. And so I think that has been an ingenious idea that we can then see things that are happening more in real time before it has to get funneled through a certain area. So I'm so thrilled to be able to look at what we're doing with our incident response form. And once that goes live, being able to then feed in what we're seeing to consumers and small businesses into what you're seeing from all of your partners. I think we're finally going to start getting a picture that we need so you can write those playbooks and start putting some of these people out of business.
Yeah, and that's clearly where we need to go. Well, thank you, Kristin. We're about out of time for this session of our series of webinars. So thank you for agreeing to come and chat with me today. It was, as always, good to talk with you and good to hear about what CSN's doing and be able to continue working with you. And I look forward to continuing our partnership in the future.
Me too. Together, we really are going to make a difference, but we just need to come together and everybody roll up their sleeves and get to work. So I appreciate your partnership also. Thank you so much, Michael, for the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and have a great day.